What replaced satisfaction wasn't rest, it was restlessness. It was that sense that this wasn't enough. Identity built on achievement is fragile. Why? It requires constant validation, constant wins, constant forward progress. So here's the hardest question I have for you today. Who are you when you're not achieving? Not theoretically, but actually. As long as we're climbing, we don't have to ask where the ladder is going. As long as we're winning, we don't have to ask whether the game matters. Achievement without alignment is just impressive emptiness. We can win at the game and still lose at what matters. We can optimize for output and still sacrifice our life. So here's the thing. You hit your goal and nothing changed. The promotion came through and the deal closed. Milestones were reached. And for a moment, you could feel it. Relief, validation, and proof that you were just right to push this hard. But then that feeling faded. And it faded faster than you expected. And what you're left with isn't satisfaction. It's just the next thing. It's another goal. It's another target. It's another mountain to climb. And because the win didn't give you what you thought it would, and you can't quite name what's missing, it's what this episode is really all about. And it's what happens when success stops feeling like success and why achievement sometimes lands hollow. So let's start with something more specific. Think about the last significant win that you had. Maybe it was a promotion, the revenue milestone, or the recognition, whatever it was. Now think for a moment about after that happened. Not about the moment during, when you were celebrating and when people were congratulating you, but when it felt real. The moment after, when you were alone and the noise had died down and when it was just you and the achievement. How long did the feeling last? Did it last a day? A few hours? Maybe only a few minutes? And what replaced it? For most men, the answer is uncomfortable. What replaced satisfaction wasn't rest. It was restlessness. It was that sense that this wasn't enough, that there's more to accomplish, that I can't stop now. This is not because we're greedy and not because we're ungrateful, but because the achievement didn't provide what we expected it to provide. So of course we thought reaching the goal would feel different. It would be more complete and more settled and be more like an arrival. But it didn't feel like an arrival. It felt more like a checkpoint. Just another marker on the road that has no end. And there's the question that most men truly avoid. If achieving the thing you work toward doesn't actually satisfy us, what's the point of the next thing? Most of us don't slow down long enough to ask that question. We just set the next goal because moving forward towards something just feels better than stopping to notice the arrival didn't feel like we thought it would. So here's something for us to consider. What did you expect to feel when you achieved your goal? And why isn't it showing up? It's a good question. Let's go a little deeper. We were taught that success is supposed to provide us with something. Not just the money and not just the recognition, but something internal. Proof that we are enough. Proof that made us feel that we made the right choices. Proof that the sacrifices were actually worth it. Proof that we're the man that we've been trying to be. And for a while, success delivered on that. With each win, we just reinforced that story, that we're on the right track and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, that we're building something that matters. But at some point, success stopped providing that feeling. You're not sure what happened. See, because we're still achieving and the wins are still coming. But they're not landing in the same way. They're not giving us the same feeling that they used to give us. And so what do? We chase bigger wins. We think maybe the next one will feel the way the early ones felt. Maybe this next level will provide what the last level didn't. Maybe if I just achieve a little bit more, the satisfaction will arrive. But of course, it doesn't. Because success never really actually provided what we thought it would provide. What success provided was a distraction. It gave us something to focus on, something that we could measure, something external that led us to avoid these internal questions. Questions like, am I building a life I actually want, or just a resume that looks impressive? Am I building or becoming the man I want to be, or just the man who achieves things? Am I truly connected to what matters, or just efficient at what's being measurable? Success lets us defer those questions because as long as we're winning, we don't have to ask those, do we? But now that the wins aren't working anymore and the questions are still there, they're louder than ever. So let's consider this for a moment. What were we expecting success to resolve that it hasn't? That's another great question. And here's where it gets harder. Somewhere along the way, we built our identity around achievement. It wasn't intentionally, maybe. Not consciously, maybe. But practically, maybe. And regardless, what ultimately happened was this. Our worth became tied to our output. Our value became tied to our performance. Our sense of self became tied to what we accomplish. And that worked until it didn't. Because identity built on achievement is fragile. Why? It requires constant validation, constant wins, constant forward progress. Because the moment that we stop achieving, the identity starts to crack. And there's the problem. We can't stop achieving. Not because we don't want to, but because our sense of self depends on it. Because if we're not that high performer, who are we? If we're not the guy who wins, what's our value? If we're not building, achieving, advancing, then what are we doing? And very likely, we don't have an answer to that question. Because we've spent so long being just defined by what we do that we've lost touch with who we are outside of everything that we do. And so we just keep on achieving. Not because the achievement satisfies us, but it's because stopping is going to feel like we're going to disappear. And so let's look at this scenario in practice. Right? We hit a goal and immediately we're on to the next one. Not because we're ambitious, but because that space in between goals just feels empty. And so we finish a project and immediately we're on to the next one. Not because we're driven, but because rest feels like stagnation. We accomplish something significant and we downplay it. Not because we're humble, but because if we actually let ourselves feel satisfied, we might stop. And stopping isn't safe when our identity depends on us moving. So here's the hardest question I have for you today. Who are you when you're not achieving? Not theoretically, but actually. And if you had to describe yourself without referencing what you've accomplished or what you do, who would you say you are? Now let's pause for a minute and let this permeate into our psyche. Because here's what most men don't see. That ambition can hide misalignment. For years, this misalignment can be there. Because as long as we're climbing, we don't have to ask where the ladder is going. As long as we're winning, we don't have to ask whether the game matters. As long as we're advancing, you don't have to ask whether the destination is worth reaching. Because ambition gives you forward motion, and forward motion feels like progress, even when it's not. Because progress towards the wrong thing isn't progress, it's just expensive drift. And the cost of that drift doesn't show up in your quarterly results, does it? It shows up in the space between our achievements. It's in those moments when you're alone, in the feeling that something's missing, even though externally everything's working. And so here's what truly gets hidden. Let's look at our relationships. We've been too busy building to invest in connection. We've been busy optimizing for output and not intimacy. We've been present enough to maintain, but not present enough to deepen. And so our relationships are functional, but they're not rich. Internally, we've been too busy executing to reflect. We've been answering what's next without asking why. We've been optimizing for achievement without asking what we're actually building toward. And so our success is impressive, but it's directionless. Let's look at meaning. We've been too busy winning to ask what winning is for. We've been measuring progress without defining what progress toward. We've been accomplishing things without asking whether they even matter. And so our achievements are real, but they're empty. And ambition didn't create these gaps. It did hide them, though. And now that ambition isn't working anymore, and the gaps are becoming visible, I want you to consider something. What has ambition let you avoid asking? And this is probably going to be the hardest part for us to articulate. Because there's a feeling, and it's not anxiety, and it's not depression, and it's not burnout. It's truly something else. It's a sense that something's off. That you're not where you're supposed to be, even though you're exactly where you worked to get. You know, you're doing everything right, but it's adding up to something that doesn't feel right. It's subtle. It's persistent. It's hard to explain. See, we can't point to what's wrong because nothing's obviously broken. Because again, we're achieving and we're providing and we're functioning. But something is missing and we just can't name it. And it's because the thing that's missing isn't external, it's internal. It's not really a problem to solve, it's an absence to feel. And you don't know how to address this absence. And so you do what you've always done, right? We just set another goal and we chase another win. We focus on the next thing because doing something feels better than sitting with the feeling that something's missing. But here's the truth. Feeling isn't going to go away because the feeling isn't about what you haven't achieved. It's about what you've lost in the process of achieving. Consider connection, presence, alignment, meaning, the things that we've talked about already, the things that don't show up on a resume. It's the things that we can't naturally optimize. It's the things that require us to stop, and we haven't stopped. So let me ask you something directly. What's the feeling you keep outrunning by staying busy? Talked a lot so far, so let's try to bring this all home. We can achieve everything that we've set out to achieve and still feel empty. And it's not because achievement is bad, but because achievement without alignment is just impressive emptiness. And we can win at the game and still lose at what matters. We can optimize for output and still sacrifice our life. We can become successful and still not become ourselves. Because success doesn't feel like success. It feels like stagnation with better optics. So here are the real questions. What would actually satisfy you, not just validate you? What would feel like enough, not just the next milestone? What would you have to change for you to pursue that instead? Look, I recognize that achievement is real and the wins do count and progress matters. It's how I've lived most of my life. And so here's the distinction I realized. If the progress isn't towards something that aligns with who you actually want to be, if the wins don't connect to what actually matters, and if the success doesn't provide what we're actually looking for, then all we're doing is climb the ladder that's leaning against the wrong building. And the higher that we climb, the more visible the misalignment becomes. So there comes a choice. We can keep on achieving, or we can stop long enough to ask whether what we're achieving is what we actually want. See, most of us just keep achieving because stopping feels dangerous when our identity depends on movement. And there's the catch. Eventually, that emptiness catches up, and no amount of achievement is going to fill it. You know, the Band of Brothers is where men stop optimizing for achievement is start building toward alignment. And if that's where you're at, then you know what to do.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.